Get used to these things. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Development Standards Committee, 12th December. First of all, can I just remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded, but it's also being broadcast live on the Angus Council YouTube channel. So can I remind all those joining us remotely to turn their microphones to mute unless they wish to speak, and they should do so by raising their hands remotely. First of all, Sarah, do you have any apologies do we have today?
Ms Convener, we have apologies from Councillors Doran, Fairweather, Gall and Melville.
Thank you. And declarations of interest or statements of transparency. Do any members have either? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. I declare an interest in item 8, report 349/23. I know a number of the people who presented letters of representation and some are personal friends. Therefore, I will not take part in any discussion and voting, and I will leave the meeting during consideration of this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLaren. Are there any other declarations? Sorry, Councillor Beattie.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Item 8, again, this is with my employer's office, but I haven't taken part in any of the discussion in the office. I've kept that separate, so I will take part in the discussion today.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you. Any others? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item 3 on building warrants. This committee is asked to note that during the period 4th November to 1st December 2023, a total of 38 building warrants and 13 amendments to warrants have been approved with an estimated cost of £27,997,800. A copy of the approved warrants have been sent to every member. So is that noted? Thank you. Agenda item 4 on delegated decisions. Again, this committee is asked to note that during the same period to 1st December 2023, 58 applications have been approved and 2 refused under the Planning Acts through the scheme of delegation to officers. Copies again have been sent to members. Is this noted? Noted. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is the minute of our previous meeting, and it's submitted for approval as a correct record, the minute of our meeting held on the 14th November. Are there any comments or adjustments considered necessary? If not, are the minutes approved? Thank you very much. Right, this morning we have 4 planning applications to consider. Agenda item 6 and agenda item 7 both deal with separate planning applications at Greenlaw Hill Farm, Greenlaw Terrace, Barry, near Carnoustie. Item 6 deals with planning application 21/00557 full by DJ Lane Homes Limited and Persimmon Homes, North Scotland, for the erection of 29 dwelling houses, formation of access roads, open space, landscaping and infrastructure at Greenlaw Hill Farm. When agenda item 7 deals with planning application 21/00558 full by the same applicants, but this time for the erection of 28 dwelling houses, roads, open space, landscaping and infrastructure on land northwest of Greenlaw at Carnoustie. I've asked the officers to present their slides and reports on both applications as they are clearly linked. However, each planning application will be debated and voted on in turn. So can I just start by asking Mr Hunter to present the slides, please?
Thank you, Convener. As you indicate, we're looking at 2 applications in this presentation. The first, with the reference 557, relates to the erection of 29 dwelling units. The second, with the reference 558, deals with the erection of 28 units, so 57 units in total on land at Greenlaw Hill, Greenlaw Terrace, Carnoustie. This is an extract from the Angus Local Development Plan, and the area of land that we're looking at is the area just highlighted in the pink tone and just in the vicinity of the cursor. So this is an area of land that's identified in the local development plan as being within the settlement boundary for Carnoustie and Barry, and it's an area of land that's allocated as an opportunity site with potential for residential development. Overall site measures around about 3.2 hectares in area. That's the land itself. The application site includes an area off the public road, Greenlaw Hill Road, which would be upgraded to facilitate the development. Now, in terms of this slide, it's worth pointing out or dealing with some of the objections. We have concerns regarding the coalescence of Barry and Carnoustie. We have concerns about the loss of greenfield agricultural land. But to be clear, the settlement boundary for Carnoustie and Barry includes the two settlements. We have development to the south of the application site dating from probably 80s and 90s, which provides some connectivity between the two settlements. The area of land that we're looking at is identified as being within the development boundary. It's an anticipated development site, and it's anticipated as being suitable for residential development. Concerns have been raised regarding school capacity. Just to confirm, we've consulted with education colleagues. The capacity at the high school in Carnoustie and Burnside Primary School, which serves the development site, are both below 80% capacity, and education colleagues are satisfied there is no unacceptable impact associated with likely pupil generation from the development on the education estate. Also, lots of objections regarding impact on healthcare infrastructure in the town. There's a local medical practice, and to confirm, we've consulted with NHS Tayside and we've consulted with the local GP practice, and neither has raised objection to this application. In terms of the local development plan, the broad principle of housing is entirely consistent with the land allocation in the local development plan. Looking at the two applications, the first, the Phase 1 application, relates to a western section of the site. This is partly brownfield. You can see buildings identified on the southern part of the site. We have existing properties at Greenlaw Terrace, just a short distance to the west. And we have the C1 public road, the Upper Victoria Link Road, which connects the A92 in the north to the Carnoustie Barry Road to the south. So 29 houses proposed on this part of the site. You can see this application site includes the carriageway of Greenlaw Hill Road, and this section of road would be upgraded in association with the proposals before you. In terms of the second application, this is identified as Phase 2, the eastern section of the site, the section sitting closest to the C1 public road. Again, just draw your attention to the existing property at Greenlaw that sits within or just to the south of that application site. We'll look at the neighbouring properties as we go through the slides in a little bit more detail. But 28 houses proposed on this part of the site. Now, you'll see from the papers that there is some planning history relating to the western part of the application site, the Phase 1 part. And there was a planning permission or a planning application refused permission in 2016. And this is the layout at that time. So the proposal was for 46 houses, all two-storey. You can see terraced properties, communal parking areas, street parking. So quite an urban form of development. And the application was refused by committee and subsequently dismissed on appeal. In his conclusions, and as you'll see from the report, the government-appointed reporter identified overdevelopment, poor quality of design for a location on the urban edge of the settlement. He raised concerns regarding loss of a hedge road to the north of the Greenlaw Hill Road. Also raised concerns about poor accessibility and poor connectivity to Barry and to Carnoustie to the south. But he raised no issue with the principle of residential development on the site. And subsequent to that, you will see again from the papers that the larger site was subsequently included within the development boundary and identified as an opportunity site for housing. If we look at the current proposal for both parts of the site, and again, perhaps just at this stage, focus on the western section. Previous application was for 46 houses. Current application is for 29, so a significant reduction in the density of the development. We have single-storey and 1.5-storey properties fronting onto the Greenlaw Hill Road, so away from the 2-storey form of development and more cottage-style properties, providing the interface between the countryside to the north and the development site itself. Again, just pick out the properties at Greenlaw Terrace. The house types that we have adjacent to those are single-storey properties, so again, reducing the impacts on neighbouring properties. The Greenlaw property, again, single-storey properties adjacent to it where there's the common boundary, and where we have 2-storey properties within the site, they're separated by open space and the carriageway of the access road. We have a raised beach feature just located to the south of the site that contains established tree planting. And again, you can see that the layout provides for some separation between the housing development and the raised beach feature itself. So an existing access from Greenlaw Hill Road, but the roadway increased in width, that's coming in a southerly direction, a footway provided along the southern carriageway of Greenlaw Hill and the improved access into the site. We have a sizable play area. That's going to include an equipped play area, and that would include a requirement for accessible play equipment, as again you'll see in the conditions before you. We have an aerial photograph that just shows, again, the context of the site. So the application site located just in this general area that you can see here. You see the C1 public road and application site sitting to the west of that. Existing housing development on the edge of Carnoustie, edge of Barry, whichever you choose, and application site sitting on the raised beach above that, behind the established landscaping. So one of the concerns that the reporter raised in relation to the previous refusal was the urban nature of the development and its location on the very edge of the settlement. So that context has changed. Members will be aware there's the new employment development taking place on land at Pitskelly, and there's new housing development taking place on land to the east of the road at Pitskelly. So very much the approach to the town on the Upper Victoria Link Road has changed in the period since the previous refusal. But notwithstanding that, I would suggest that the layout that we have before us responds more appropriately to the edge of town location. Again, just another aerial photograph. This time we have the C1 public road at the bottom of the slide. The phase 2 area just sitting to the west of the road, again identified with the cursor. We have the Greenlaw property in this area, and you can see the general brownfield nature of the eastern part, the phase 1 site in this area. Greenlaw Hill Road improved in the southerly direction, and the hedge that was considered important in terms of the previous decision retained in the area that we see here. And again, we have conditions that require measures for the protection of existing landscaping, including hedgerows and trees during the course of construction. There will be loss of trees as a consequence, not least of the widening of the road. There is verge side landscaping to the south of the road, but the widening of the road in the southerly direction necessitates that removal. But there is a public interest associated with the improvement of both vehicular and pedestrian accessibility in the area. Just a couple of photographs within the site itself. Here we see the nature of the western part of the site, the phase 1 site. You can see existing buildings, a derelict farmhouse, derelict farm buildings, and an assortment of machinery, equipment that sits around that at the present time, generally detracting from the environment of the area. I've spoken about Greenlaw Hill Road. This is looking in an easterly direction, so from Greenlaw Terrace, the properties to the west of the site, towards the C1 public road. And this is the section between Greenlaw Terrace and the C1 public road that would be widened and would see the footway provision. So the landscaping that we see along the southern boundary, the right-hand side of this image, would be lost to facilitate that road widening, but the hedge that's regarded as being important, the buffer between the urban area and the settlement, retained to the north of that road. So if we look at the phase 1 application in a little bit more detail, 29 houses, and we have a couple of aerial images here, photomontage type images that show the nature of the development that's proposed. The Greenlaw Hill Road, you can see the cottage style properties, 1.5 storey, single story properties fronting that road, and we see the setback for other properties from the raised beach area. SUD's facility located at the southern extent of the site to capture surface water. Again, you'll note there are concerns raised and objections regarding the potential for flooding, but the conditions require measures to mitigate that. They require further flood risk assessment. Flood risk assessment has been undertaken in relation to the application, but we require additional details in relation to the drainage informed by a further flood risk assessment, just to confirm there will be no increase in flood risk to other properties in the area. But our roads colleagues are satisfied there should be no unacceptable impacts. The general principle of the drainage proposals in relation to this site are acceptable, subject to those detailed conditions. And again, you can see open space area just at the southern extent, the SUDS area located just in the area identified with the cursor. So good separation between the open space, or between the houses and the existing landscaping around the raised beach area. If I move on, again, just some images. This shows an impression of the properties as they would front onto Greenlaw Hill Road and the agricultural land that lies to the north. So as I've said, cottage-style properties, introduction of stone boundary walls just to reflect the rural character, and some additional planting, pedestrian connectivity between the houses to provide linkages between the houses within the development and the improved footway on the public road itself. Spoken about the properties in Greenlaw Terrace, single-storey prefabricated style properties. You can see them in this image. And next couple of images just show the relationship between the properties, the proposed properties on the western extent of the development that we see here, single-storey properties facing towards the single-storey properties, the existing properties in Greenlaw Terrace. So fairly sympathetic to the neighbouring development, and complies with relevant window-to-window distances to minimise impacts on those properties. In terms of the phase 2 application site, this is the section closest to the Upper Victoria Link Road, the C1 public road that comes into Carnoustie. As we'll see in slides, we have landscaping associated with the public road running down the eastern extent of this application site. And again, just a couple of images that show the nature of the development in this area. We have the landscaping that sits between the housing development and the C1 public road. We have the Greenlaw Hill Road running to the north of the site. And again, single-storey, 1.5-storey properties providing the frontage to that. Houses addressing the street, providing that active frontage, and the car parking provided to the side of the houses to reduce the appearance of car parking in the public realm. Within this part of the development, you can see the public open space. You can see that sits adjacent to the existing property. This is the Greenlaw House, and mitigated from impacts from the neighbouring property by the proximity of the open space. Equipped play area located in the area that we see roughly here, with good natural supervision from the houses that would front on to that area. And again, houses closest to the Greenlaw property, single storey in height. Again, just a couple of images that show the interaction, the interaction with the public realm. This is the Greenlaw Hill Road, hedgerow retained to the north, stone walls provided to the south, improved carriageway, widened carriageway with the footway, and the cottage-style properties addressing the street in this area. Again, where we turn the corner, high-quality boundary treatments to provide the privacy for the neighbouring properties. The Greenlaw property itself, this is looking across the site, so this is looking from the southeast corner towards Greenlaw Hill Road, which runs in the middle distance that we see here. You can see the nature and extent of the existing landscaping that provides the buffer to the public road, the C1 public road, and you can see the Greenlaw property here. And again, just a couple of images that show the relationship between the existing property and the blank elevation of the neighbouring single-storey property, which would be the closest building to the existing dwelling. So very much seeking to minimise impacts on the properties in the area, and something that we think is quite acceptable in terms of impacts on the environment, infrastructure and existing residents. Just looking at the development as an entity, this is the two phases linking together. We have the access that serves the phase 2 site and the phase 1 site. This is the existing route that serves the Greenlaw property, but upgraded to serve the larger development. And the bottom image perhaps shows the separation between the proposed houses and the existing landscape features, the important features that form the raised beach area. I want to pick out, just can perhaps make out in this slide, pedestrian connectivity from within the site to the C1 public road, and that's certainly desirable. We now have potential for a bus route to serve the housing that's been built in the Pitskelly area. So we now have potential for the bus route in this area, pedestrian linkage through to that. But again, this is just a photograph that shows roughly where that pedestrian route would emerge. Adjacent to the C1 road, so we have the landscaping, the route would come out in this area, and you can see no footway to the west of the road. And we have an area just on the bend of the road. So again, you'll notice in conditions, we have a requirement for pedestrian footway to be provided along the site frontage, connecting to the existing pedestrian crossing just in Carnoustie itself. So footway connecting to the town on the west of the carriageway that we see here, providing good connectivity to the town. The primary school is located to the south, so providing potential for older school children to walk to school, also providing potential for pedestrian connectivity to shops and services within the urban area. Going back to the layout, and just re-emphasising, this is a site that's allocated for residential development within the local development plan. It's an opportunity site that provides specifically for residential development. There are concerns about loss of agricultural land, but you can see it's within the development boundary. A significant part of it is brownfield. Residential development is anticipated. Concerns about impact on existing infrastructure, but the local primary school is predicted to have a declining school role, even taking account of proposed housing development. There's adequate capacity at the secondary school, no objections from NHS Tayside or from the local medical practice. Concerns about impact on road infrastructure, but actually this proposal will provide improvement both to the road infrastructure and to pedestrian connectivity in the area. This is a proposal that, in officer's opinion, addresses the deficiencies that were identified with the application in 2016. It complies with the development plan policy, and it is recommended for approval subject to the conditions before you. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Mr Hunter, for a very thorough explanation of all that. Can you perhaps just leave that slide on for a second, please? Before I go to members for any questions of Mr Hunter, can I just come in two things for clarification, Alan, please? On this, the south of that slide, what looks like the roadway or pathway coming from Greenlaw Hill into development to the south that leads to that green area, what is that intended for? It looks like it's coming up and merging with the new road coming in.
Thank you, Convener. I perhaps should have clarified that in the presentation. The intention of that road is simply and purely to provide access to the SUDs and open space for maintenance purposes. And again, you'll note in conditions we're seeking measures to ensure that it's only used for that purpose. So it's not intended to serve as a vehicular access for any of the houses within the development.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up on you mentioned the pedestrian access onto the C1 road and showed us that. For clarification, will that pavement extend up to the junction with Greenlaw Hill Road, or is it just the pavement just from the exit route onto C1 for pedestrians?
So the intention is that would extend from the Greenlaw Hill Road along the site frontage and down into Carnoustie.
Thanks for that. That's me dealt with from that so far. Any other questions from elected members? Councillor Clark.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Convener. Mr Hunter, could you just, the wee comments and questions that are definitely questions, but if you could just indulge me for a minute. They may not be mitigating things, but there's things that I've jotted down that I wanted an answer to, if you don't mind. You mentioned the upgraded road. That's fine. I'm just thinking in terms of 2 or 3 things. You mentioned footways as well, and you mentioned that there is a condition, of course, for the upgraded footpath as well. I'm just thinking in terms of the fact that we're big nowadays, and we should be, on 20 minutes neighbourhoods. You mentioned Burnside Primary. Is there, or have I missed it, that there's a direct footpath for children to Burnside Primary? And can I come back just after that, please?
Absolutely. So the conditions of the planning permission require the provision of the footway on the western side of the C1 road. So that's from the site down to the pedestrian crossing, which is within the Carnoustie settlement boundary, and that's providing effectively the pedestrian route to the primary school. Apologies, I'll say that again. So the conditions attached to the planning permission require the provision of a footway from the site down into Carnoustie to an existing pedestrian crossing. So that's effectively providing the potential for the pedestrian link from the development to other services within the town, which include the primary school, include the medical centre, which would be within the relevant walking distance. There are also there's a local shop within the Ravensby Park Gardens area, which is just to the south, which again could be accessed by that footway. And we have other shopping areas a short distance from the site, just to the east on the Barry Road within Carnoustie. So the principle of it is generally consistent with the 20-minute neighbourhood.
Thank you, Convener. Is it okay if I go on for a minute? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr Hunter. Just in terms of where these sites are, in terms where they are next to, relatively near the main road, you've got nice hedging, etc. Acoustically, do we think that's going to be enough? Because you still will have a noisy road.
So Greenlaw Hill Road itself to the north is a fairly short stretch of road and fairly lightly trafficked at the present time. The relationship... It's my fault. I thought I'd pressed it. Greenlaw Hill Road itself to the north of the site is relatively lightly trafficked. It's a short connection road between the C1 and the Barry village itself, so very lightly trafficked and likely to remain so. The relationship between houses that are proposed that would front onto the Greenlaw Hill Road is fairly typical of what's in the area at the present time. So you've seen the properties at Greenlaw Terrace. The relationship between those and the road is very similar to what's proposed. So acoustically, no concerns in relation to that. And similarly, in relation to the C1 public road to the east, or to the east of the proposed houses, we have a bit of a bund that sits between the C1 public road and the houses, and there is the substantial landscaping on top of that. There will be timber fencing provided as the screen, if you like, to the rear gardens of the properties. Now, that's not following the outward-facing perimeter block that we would normally look for within a housing development, but in circumstances where there is that very substantial landscaping that's there at present time, it's considered acceptable when all other parts of the development are okay, and our environmental health colleagues have no concern regarding noise impacts in relation to this development.
That you finished, Councillor Clark? Switch your mic.
Beg your pardon.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Beattie, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Convener. Mr Hunter, it's a bit of a technical question. It kind of relates to the school as well. When we see developments coming up before us, it always surprises me that the estimate of the number of children expected in a development is always so much lower than what seems to make common sense to everyone. Could you maybe explain why that might be? And is it actually borne out in the numbers?
So planning policy and the work that our education colleagues do looks at what's referred to as pupil product ratio. So it's not an estimate necessarily of how many children are likely to be in the development. It's an estimate of how many additional school pupils the development is likely to generate within the catchment area of that school. Now, information suggests that for a development of this nature, you will get existing residents from Carnoustie choosing to move to a different location within Carnoustie. So that's not necessarily new pupils to the school. It's a displacement, if you like. So it's the figure is not an estimate of how many children are likely to live within the development. It's a pupil product ratio based on the number of new school pupils that are likely to come to that school, and it's the figures that we've used for a considerable period of time. I think in conjunction with education colleagues, we're looking at the appropriateness of those, but I don't think there's any indication that they are wildly inaccurate. They're broadly reflective of figures that are used in other authorities. It's not an exact science, it's an estimate. But as I say, in terms of the primary school, taking account of the development that's taking place within its catchment, it's still projected to have a declining school roll.
Thanks, Councillor Beattie. Any other questions or from anybody online? No? So, any questions for the applicant's agent? Councillor Beattie for this. Mr. Murray, did you say it?
Mr. Fotheringham or Mr. Barry?
Right. Mr. Fotheringham, would you be taking any questions? Yeah. Do you want to just come down to this microphone here then, please? Now, I understand you're not actually making a statement, you're just willing to answer questions. Is that correct? Okay, we'll start with Councillor Beattie then. In that case, if you press your microphone on right hand side.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Just a quick question. The play area is going to be managed and maintained, but by whom? By the developer?
I believe that will be maintained and controlled by the factor. There will be a factor for the landscaping as well, and that will kind of encompass all of that.
Councillor Darno.
Thank you. Similar question regarding the salt buckets for ice and dog waste provision. Would you be able to provide them on the site? Because that's always a bugbear of ours.
Yeah, that's something that's going to required by. Yeah, that's something that's required by the council or anyone else who can look into that and at least put that forward. Okay.
Anyone else for questions? Oh, okay. Thanks very much indeed. Right, we'll move to comments from members on this application. Councillor Duff, is that with you?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I've been on this committee long enough to remember the 2016 application, and that was, I think, quite controversial at the time and was rejected by elected members, and Scottish Government reporters sided with that view. And I think from memory that the chief concerns elected members had at that time, and this we're looking at phase one, effectively the comparison, was there were too many houses on the site and there were large two-storey houses overbearing on the single-storey ones at the edge of the site. And I think that's why elected members rejected that planning application. And I think we can see from the number of houses on phase one, which is 29 rather than 46, and the sympathetic joining on to the existing housing, this is a much better development, and to my eye certainly looks quite an attractive development. And we have to bear in mind that the decision was taken way back in 2014 to build the Pitskelly development, which is effectively on the other side of the, whatever it is, the C1 road. So, I think that decision was taken by elected members at that time. So I would think this looks like a good development, a good use of brownfield land, and I would be very supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks, Convener. This site has been within the local development plan for many years now, and we do, of course, have a great shortage of housing in Scotland, and particularly in the south of Angus, where within Angus the greatest demand for housing is. The conditions, I believe, mitigate and the report counters all the objections. Some of the objections have been that there's already more than enough housing in the stream in this area. Well, there's exactly what we think is enough housing in the plan so far, which is about to be changed. But that is where the demand is. That is where developers have to develop. They can only develop houses where they can sell them. When it comes to the loss of prime agricultural land, well, of course, that is what happens. You lose more if you want to have a lower housing density. In this particular case, though, of course, a lot of this land is already brownfield. It's been developed for other purposes than agriculture in the past. So I see no reason at all to reject this. I think it's a very good application. And hopefully it'll take place soon so that people can get homes. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brace. Any other comments from members? No? Okay, well, initially we are considering agenda item 6, which is planning application 21-00557 full, which is for the western edge of this. Now, as convener, I'm conscious that there are, in total for items 6 and 7, there are 81 letters of representation, of which the majority are objections. So you'll bear with me that I will take my time and just have a look at all this to consider it all. So to sum up, I acknowledge that the planning application submitted in 2016, as Councillor Duff refers to, was refused, and that appeal again refused. However, the appeal reporter concluded that residential development would be acceptable on the site if the issues of overdevelopment, density and design, loss of verge and hedgerow to the north, accessibility to the site for pedestrians, cyclists and school children, amongst other things, were to be all addressed. This application now takes account of all of these factors. In addition, the original plan for 46 houses on the western edge of the site has been reduced to 29, either bungalows or 1.5-storey houses, in keeping with that already at Greenlaw Hill. So while taking cognizance of the number of submissions from objectors, a number of the representations refer to issues that cannot be controlled by the planning system, such as provisions of new shops, a petrol station, or even service at the local health centre. The latter is still accepting patients, despite concerns of patient waiting times. Despite comments to the contrary, both Burnside Primary School and Carnoustie High School currently are well under capacity and are forecast to remain so until the end of this decade, and in fact the percentage occupancy will decrease towards the end of this decade. This development, in my opinion, will provide new homes, including affordable homes, and may actually help sustain the services in the community. I've known this area of land for years, and the western area of the site has rarely been cultivated in that time. So accordingly, I'm going to move approval of this planning application, and can I ask for a seconder? Councillor Brace, thank you very much. Are there any amendments to it? Nope, thank you. In that case, planning application 21/00557 full is hereby approved. If we can now turn to agenda item 7, which is on the eastern side of the development, which is providing 28 houses on the site northwest of Greenlaw Hill Farm. We've we've had questions already, and questions to Mr Hunter, and also opportunity for questions to the applicant's agents, and we've had comments as well. So for the same reasons and more, bearing in mind the thorough and broad conditions placed on this application, as with the previous application, I'm going to move approval of this, application 21/00558 full. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor McLaren, thank you very much. Is there any amendment to it? Nope, thank you. In that case, the planning application 21/00558 full is hereby approved. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for your time as well. We now move on to agenda item 8. Councillor McLaren will leave, having declared an interest. We'll wait for him to leave. We'll call you back in, Councillor McLaren, when we're finished. Right. Agenda item 8 deals with planning application 22/00 full, submitted by Relay Suttyside Limited for the installation of a 29.1 megawatt solar array with a 20.8 megawatt battery energy storage system and ancillary infrastructure of Suttyside Farm in Forfar. Again, Mr Hunter, if you'd care to start to present the slides, please.
Thank you again, Convener. As you indicate, a planning application at Suttyside Farm, just north of Forfar, for a solar and battery energy storage development and associated works. Like the Carnoustie application, one that's generated a significant amount of public interest. If we look at the generality of the application site, we have an aerial photograph. The application site itself clearly edged in red on the plan before you. Just to pick out some notable features along the northern extent of the application site, we have the Lemno Burn. We have the Brechin Road, or what was once the Brechin Road, running to the west of the site. Carsview Road Industrial Estate located to the south, along with properties, residential properties at Suttyside. And we have properties at the Benzel, just located to the east of the image that we see here. And I believe we have some speakers from that area who we will hear from later on. In terms of the local development plan and relevant development plan policy, we have the local plan extract for Forfar and application site just located to the north of the development boundary that we see on the plan here. So sections of the site out with but adjacent to the development plan boundary. Access for construction purposes taken from the North Mains Road that you can see just running from the Brechin Road in the area, again, just identified by the cursor. Now, a few matters in relation to planning policy I want to pick up first of all. And members will be aware that the National Planning Framework 4 was approved by Parliament earlier this year. And Policy 1, which is reproduced on page 390 of your papers, seeks to facilitate development that addresses the climate emergency. It requires significant weight to be attached to that in the decision-making process. Policy 5 in the NPF, which is page 392 of your papers, deals with soils. And criterion B of that allows for the development of prime quality agricultural land where it's associated with renewable energy development. That's an exception. The policy specifically allows for that. Now, there's some suggestion that we should apply that policy exceptionally, but that's not how I believe the policy is intended to apply. There's an exception that specifically allows for renewable energy development on prime land, and I think we're obliged to have regard to that. Policy 11 deals with energy. That's on page 395 of your papers. And again, it indicates that development proposals for renewable energy development, including battery and solar development, will be supported. Now, that's caveated. It has to be considered in the round and in the context of all other relevant policies. But that is the statement of the policy. If we look at the intent of the policy, which is set out in National Planning Framework 4, the intent of that policy is to encourage, promote and facilitate all forms of renewable energy development. That is the policy environment within which the application must be considered. And I would suggest that's a very positive and a very favourable policy environment. Next image shows an extract from the Council's published guidance on landscape capacity for solar development. The area of land that we're looking at just to the north of Forfar is identified as broad lowland landscape character type. And it's a landscape character type where council officers have identified that there is broadly medium capacity. There is capacity to accommodate solar development. The guidance provides advice in relation to the siting of development. And it also suggests that ultimately this is an area that has future potential to be a landscape with solar development as a defining element in it. A defining element, not a dominant element, but something that would be obvious to those within that landscape character type. In terms of that area, we have existing development located just to the west of the application site at Paddon Arm. That's maybe 3.5 kilometres to the west of the application site. And we'll look at that as we go through the copious number of slides, I'm afraid, that we have for this. We have approved development at Carsburn, can't quite remember the name of the site, but on land to the east of the development. Now, that was approved a number of years ago, and the Scottish Government database suggests that development has been abandoned. Development did commence. There were some preparatory works undertaken, so that development could be resurrected, but the suggestion is it has been abandoned. And members will recall that more recently we've granted planning permission for a more modest-sized solar development on land to the south of Forfar at Carsgownie. So there are other solar developments within the area, either consented or, in the case of the Padnarm development, operational. But certainly I would suggest we have not yet reached a stage where the landscape is dominated by solar arrays. So this is an area where our landscape capacity study suggests there is potential capacity for solar development. Looking at the application site in a little bit more detail, if we start from the left-hand side of the screen, we have the proposed construction access. So that's running along the southern extent of the golf driving range area. So we have the golf driving range located in the area that we see here. Construction access taken along the southern extent of that site, and the development built from this area. So construction estimated to take around 6 months in time, and you'll see again conditions that seek to mitigate construction impacts associated with the development. 55 hectares in total, but again you can perhaps see that in terms of the red line site boundary, there are significant areas within the site that would be undeveloped, that would not contain either solar panels, the blue lines that you see on the screen, or the battery storage, the area that you see just to the identified in the black, just in the middle ground of the screen. So significant areas where there'd be no development, and as we'll see in subsequent images, where landscaping is proposed. We have Forfar galvanisers just located to the south of the site, Suttyside Industrial Estate located a short distance to the south. We have residential properties at Suttyside, Suttyside Road, just in the area that we see here. Significant number of objections from residents in this area. We have North White Hills, located just to the southwest, and we have properties at the Benzel, located just to the east of the application site in this area. Also, we have properties at Hatton of Carse, located just a short distance to the north of the application site and separated from it by the field that you see in this area. But just an initial context of the application site itself. In terms of the solar panels, you'll note from the report that this proposal is for tracking panels. So these are panels that are laid on in rows that follow a north-south axis. The panels themselves tilt from east to west, depending on the time of day and the direction of sun. Panels also have potential to sit in a horizontal position that you can see just with the line through the middle. So reasonable separation distance between the rows of panels, and potential for the panels to tilt either to the west or to the east, as I say, depending on the time of day. Again, just in terms of a little bit more clarity, this is the Gynde, just to the northwest of Arbroath. You get an impression of solar panels. This is taken from the public road. Panels here, maybe around about 400, 500 metres from the public road, existing farm buildings, farmhouse, and the solar panels sitting behind those properties in this location. But it gives an impression of solar panels within the landscape. The other element of the proposal is the battery storage, and you can see that within the northern part of the proposed development, just in this area here, and in a little bit more detail, you can see the proposed battery units. I think 14 battery container units and associated units with the battery units. substation building just located to the south, along with a customer building itself, so a porta-cabin type structure, which would be there for people working on the site. But you can see, in terms of the battery storage, significant separation distance to the boundaries of the site, round about 60-metre separation distance to the boundaries of the site, and in excess of 300 metres from the battery storage to any neighbouring properties. Now, there are issues raised in relation to safety and health concerns associated with the development, and that's entirely understandable. But I think we need to look at this and say the battery technology is similar to the battery technology that we have in electric cars. It's similar to the battery technology that we have in mobile phones. It's technology that has been rolled out in domestic settings. So there's increased move to have localized domestic storage of energy. And this is the same technology. Now, there's no indication in planning policy guidance that there are likely to be any significant health impacts associated with that. And in any event, the greatest mitigation that can be provided is separation distance. And in this case, we have fairly significant separation distance from the battery containers to the nearest houses. In terms of fire risk, there is English guidance on the subject, and it suggests generally a separation distance of battery container units to neighbouring occupied properties of about 25 metres. So we're significantly in excess of that distance in relation to this proposal. In terms of solar panels, again, it's the same technology that we see deployed on residential properties. It's the same technology that NHS Tayside are looking to install at Stracathro Hospital. There is no indication that there are any significant health risks associated with this type of technology. The infrastructure within the site, the transformers, the substation, again, the type of infrastructure that we commonly see dotted around our urban areas. There are potential impacts associated with that, but in this case, the separation distances to neighbouring properties exceed those which are typically found with similar infrastructure within urban areas. In terms of the battery structures and the other infrastructure within the site, very much containerised, shipping container type units, but in the context of the overall development that we're looking at, not something that's likely in itself to give rise to any significant or unacceptable visual impacts. You get an impression of the various structures that would be found within the site. In addition, we would have security fencing around sections of the perimeter of the site, and also closed-circuit television cameras to provide a level of security for the development. Again, just another image of the development itself, and this one has the proposed landscaping that would be provided as mitigation. So I've made reference to the golf driving range, and you can see a proposal for a block of tree planting to sit on the eastern boundary of the golf driving range to provide some mitigation. We have further tree planting proposed down the western boundary of the development, and we have planting proposed along the northern extent of the boundary in the proximity of the Lemno Water. We have significant areas of landscaping within the development site, which would take a variety of forms, and you'll see we have two conditions that deal specifically with that. One that requires a detailed landscape proposal plan, and another that requires a biodiversity enhancement plan for the entire site. Now, the applicant has identified there would be a biodiversity enhancement area provided as part of the development, just in the proximity of the North White Hills and Benzel properties. There's no detail in relation to that, but the requirement for that to be provided is dealt with through the proposed conditions. In addition to the tree planting, we have hedge planting identified around the perimeters of the site, taking the nature of different heights. So generally to the east or to the north of panels, it would be allowed to grow to 6 metres in height, and a lower height where it's to the west or to the south of the proposed panels. But fairly substantial landscaping proposed as part of the overall development itself. Now, clearly, that landscaping would take a period of time to provide effective mitigation, but again, that's going to be dependent upon the detail that's provided. There is scope to require the planting of semi-mature or certainly something more than whips. In association with the proposal, there's scope to require fast-growing plants to be provided as part of that. So it would certainly take some time to be effective, but we're looking at a development that's proposed to be in situ for 40 years, so potential for that to provide benefit in the longer term. Just in terms of the surrounding area, you'll see the report touches on the natural environment, built environment considerations. We have listed buildings at Carsgray, Sundial and House that are located just to the north of the site. Category B listed structures, but by virtue of the separation distance, the nature of the properties, the nature of the landscaping that those properties benefit from, very little impact on the setting or special interest of those listed structures. We have a scheduled ancient monument, again, just located to the north in the proximity of Carsgray. That's a below-ground structure believed to be a souterrain. And again, it's an archaeological interest, and you'll see that our archaeological advisors have raised no specific concerns regarding any impact on the scheduled monument, and certainly very little impact on its setting. The red lines that you can see on this plan relate to core paths, so it gives an impression of the core path network that is in the vicinity of the site. So if I can just pick out the Benzel again, so this is the eastern extent of the site. You can see core path running between Heather Stacks and the Benzel area. So that's just to the north of the application site. Again, pick out the Lemno Burn. So the field between the Lemno Burn and the core path remains undeveloped, but certainly development in this area would be apparent and obvious, certainly in the initial period, from the core path. In addition, we have the core path that runs from North Mains to Sutty Side. The western section of that route from the Brechin Road, travelling in an easterly direction, would be used as the temporary construction access. So certainly potential for disruption of people using that route for recreational purposes during that construction period. But we have a condition that requires an access management plan and a requirement for any impact on that core path to be mitigated, including during the construction process. Some concerns raised regarding the junction between the road, the access track, and the public road, the Brechin Road. But again, you'll see from the papers before you that our roads colleagues are satisfied that safe access can be taken from that point, again, subject to the conditions that are proposed in the papers before you. If we look at an aerial image of the surrounding area, and again, just pick out the core paths, Heather Stacks located at the top left-hand side of the screen, and core path running along the northern section and down towards the Benzel. So development in this area, the solar development, the nature of the development is going to be apparent and evident from the core path. There's no doubt about that. There is potential for that to be mitigated as the landscaping and planting takes place, but the nature of that track will change during the life of the development. If we look at the southern core path, so North Mains, Brechin Road, the core path in this area runs along to Forfar galvanisers. The eastern section of this route runs down the boundary of the galvanisers through the industrial estate. We're looking at a separation distance of maybe about 40 to 50 metres with landscape planting between this section of the core path and the closest solar panels. So again, the nature of this track will change, but I think we need to bear in mind that this track at the present time runs through a section of the industrial estate and it has boundaries with industrial uses. So the nature of the track will change. Rather than running through open agricultural fields at this point, it will be adjacent to solar panels, but again, through the mitigation that's proposed, the planting that's proposed in time, that impact will be further mitigated. I've touched upon the construction access. I've indicated that roads are satisfied that the junction can be adequately used. I think we need to bear in mind these core paths are essentially farm track routes. So whilst they will be used in construction process of the solar development, they could, as matters stand, and will, as matters stand, be used by agricultural vehicles, and that could include fairly intensive activity during periods of harvest. So these are routes where there is potential for some vehicle movement in any case, and as I've indicated, we have the requirement for the access management plan, which would require mitigation specifically in relation to the core path to the south. And again, just going back to the landscaping, core path in this area, and you can see the field that provides the separation distance to the north. Much closer, the core path boundary runs along the development site boundary to the east in this area, so much less separation distance at this area, but again, some landscape mitigation proposed through the course of time. And in terms of the North Mains core path, we can see the planting that's proposed on the southern boundary of the development to help provide mitigation in the longer term between the panels and users of the core path itself. And we see the planting that's proposed in the vicinity of the golf driving range. This is a zone of theoretical visibility, and the drawing before you is a representation of those areas where, taking account of existing vegetation and the proposed mitigation that's included within the development, it gives an impression of those areas that are going to be subject to the greatest visual change, where the solar development would be most visible in the immediate surrounding landscape. So you can see the orange tone and yellow tones are areas where there's greatest visibility. That reduces to areas where there's likely to be no visibility, with the white areas, and areas where there's going to be more restricted visibility with the blue areas of tone. I want to pick out some properties on this image. So we have Hatton of Carse located to the north. We have the Benzel properties located to the east. We have the North White Hills, properties to the southeast, Suttyside properties, properties in the vicinity of the Zor to the southwest, and the golf driving range to the west. And we'll walk round those properties in terms of the visualizations. At this stage, I think it's again worth pointing out there are no objections to this application from our statutory consultees. We've undertaken consultation with a broad range of people in relation to aviation interests, in relation to the road safety issues, in relation to flood risk. You'll see there's no objection from SEPA or our own roads engineers in relation to flood risk matters. There's glint and glare assessment. No objection from environmental health in relation to that. We do have a condition that requires mitigation of any glint and glare issues that arise. And we have conditions that deal with noise, both during construction and operation of the solar development. But those are conditions that our environmental health colleagues consider are appropriate to the development before us. This image, and before we go much further, I want to touch on this one. And this is we've shared with members previously the decision for the solar development at Berry Hill. And this was an application that was subject of appeal to Scottish ministers. And in the context of this report, we've said it's relevant insofar as it aids understanding of how development plan policies are interpreted. So at Berry Hill, there were sections of the site that were prime quality agricultural land. The reporter's view was our local development plan policies and Scottish planning policy at the time allowed for development of prime land where it was associated with renewable energy development. His opinion on that was fairly clear-cut. In relation to this proposal, we had a core path running down through the solar development. The reporter's view was the amenity of people using that core path would change. They would go from walking through open, undeveloped agricultural fields to walking through sections of solar development. But the reporter's view was that with appropriate mitigation, in that case the provision of separation distances and landscaping, ultimately the enjoyment of that route would not be adversely affected to an extent that would justify refusal of planning permission where the development was providing the benefits of renewable energy development. The other thing I want to pick out on this image are the residential properties. So we had a residential property at North Bin, just identified in the area highlighted with the cursor. So that was sitting between sections of panel and taking access through the solar development. The reporter accepted that was a significant impact, but he did not consider that the impact on that property in itself merited refusal of the development. We also had properties in the vicinity of Binns Farm to the south. Again, quite a few residential properties along the access track that you can see there. And again, appreciation that the solar development, the solar panels would be visible from that area, but visibility of the panels themselves was not a reason to refuse planning permission. And you'll see at paragraph 714 of the report before you, there's a little bit of guidance in relation to how impacts on individual properties should be considered. The test is not whether solar panels or solar development or any other development is visible from a property. The consideration is, would the impact be of such a degree that would make it an undesirable or unsatisfactory place to live? And that's quite a high threshold to meet. You've got to say, this is a place that in normal circumstances, a person would not want to live because of the nature of the impacts they're experiencing. With that in mind, we'll walk around the site. And starting first of all at Hatton of Carse to the north, I would suggest that these are probably the properties that are most significantly affected by the development. Separated from the closest panels by a field. This is the field that provides separation to the core path. So core path running along the southern extent of the Hatton of Carse cottages along to Heather Stacks. So round about 180, 190 metres from these houses to the panels. The blue lines that you see on this image give an impression of the arc of view that would be occupied by the solar panels from these properties. It's significant. The impact on these properties, the visual impact, will be significant. There is no question about that. There is no objection from the residents of those properties to this application. Just a view of the properties themselves. You can see 3 properties sitting in this area and farmhouse just behind the tree that you see in this area, but effectively 4 properties. They all have principal elevations. Their main views are all to the south, all towards the solar development. This is a significant impact. 2 images that we see here. The top image is looking from east to west. The bottom image is a continuation of that. So that's from roughly the middle of the solar development across further to the west. So largely the full extent of the southern outlook of these properties would be occupied by solar development. I'm going to over-egg this, but that impact is significant. And you can see that by virtue of the photomontages. So the land rises slightly, which increases the visual prominence of the turbines. You can see the field that would provide the separation, but you can see the rising nature of the land means in the short term, at the very least, the panels are going to be an obvious and prominent and unavoidable feature for the residents of those properties. Benzoll across in this area, middle of the site, and we have the Brechin Road located at the western extent of the site, just in the bottom image that we see here. And again, I'm going to caveat, photomontages generally make things look smaller, less significant and further away than they do in reality. So my advice to members is, if you stand at those properties, the panels will appear more obvious than they do in that image. The application includes proposals for fairly substantial landscaping along that northern boundary. And the indication is, so you've got this green line here, that is through time and through the passage of time, the landscaping would grow such that the panels would largely be obscured or at least partially hidden by the landscaping. Now, the length of time that takes to happen will depend upon the nature of the planting that's put in, the age of the planting stock, the mix of planting, and that would all be controlled by planning condition, including requirements for not just whips, but more mature species to be planted as well, and for faster growing plants to be included within that. Our landscape officer suggests that you're looking at a period of 5 years before you would achieve mitigation, and 10 years before that would really provide anything by virtue of true screening of the development itself. So impacts, certainly in the short term, are going to be significant, and the impacts on those houses are similar to the impacts that would be experienced on the core path. I would suggest those are impacts that are not dissimilar to the impacts that the reporter said were acceptable in the Berryhill decision. That all sounds very theoretical, and it's difficult to picture. This is the solar development at Padnarm. So we have the village to the south of the public road, and we have, in this case, round about 20,000 solar panels located to the north of the road. The separation distance you're looking at between the village and these solar panels is about 160 metres. So comparable to what we're looking at for this development. And just a street view image, so an image taken from a camera that's slightly elevated, gives you an impression of what panels look like at that type of distance. Now, again, I'm going to caveat this by saying, in reality, they probably look a little bit closer if you stand in that location. And in this instance, the panels are dropping away. They're going on to lower lying ground. So the impacts at Hatton of Carse are likely to be greater than you see here, but no landscape mitigation in this instance, and landscape mitigation proposed at Hatton of Carse. If we move round to the Bensall, so this is the eastern side of the application site, and again you get an impression of the proximity between the properties and the solar development or the development site itself. Area closest to these properties would not occupy or not be occupied by panels or the batteries. The battery is some distance away to the west of the site. In this case, we're looking at about maybe 150, 160 metres between the closest house and the closest battery, solar panels. Sorry. Now, houses in this location you can see slightly elevated in comparison to the road. A number of the properties have been designed so that they specifically take advantage of views to the west. You can see some with solar panels on their roofs. But certainly, a number of properties in this location, development located to the north and west of those. Areas of green that we see here would remain undeveloped. We have, firstly, a view as existing. Again, this is the, if you like, the western extent of the view, probably southwest more than anything else, looking back towards Forfar, across the site and around to the north. So we have the Hatton of Carse properties that we've just looked at, you can make out in this image. You can see dotted lines on this image which suggest that the solar panels within the southern extent of the development would not be visible from this location. The panels within the northern extent of the development would be visible. So extent 1, extent 2 and extent 5, those are the northern section of panels within the development would be visible from this location. And we have a photomontage that gives an impression of what that would look like with no mitigation. So again, you can see the panels occupying a significant part of the landscape in the vicinity of these developments, of these properties, sorry. And these are showing the panels tilted in an east-facing development, so tilted such that they would be facing towards the houses themselves. We have another image, this time which shows the panels occupying slightly different tilt. So this is where the face of the panels would not be looking directly towards the properties. And the impression from this image is that that impact would be reduced, but in that instance, the properties are going to see the fairly industrial nature of the frames against which the panels would be attached. So again, a different impact, but still a reasonably significant impact, albeit with some separation distances that are fairly similar to what we have at Padnarm, and separation distances that are frankly considerably in excess of that which the reporter determined were acceptable at Berryhill. And we also have photomontage from this location that gives an impression of the view with the landscaping once it's achieved a degree of maturity. And the indication is that there would be a high degree of mitigation provided by the landscaping provided. But the test is not whether the solar panels are going to be visible. The test is this going to be an unacceptable place to live? One view from the properties would have significant expanse and significant opportunity to view the wind turbines, but I would suggest the remaining views from the properties, the remaining areas of the properties, would still provide a high degree of residential amenity. As we move round, this is to the southeast, the North White Hills properties. This time we're looking at a separation distance in the region of 300 metres between the closest properties and the houses. We have the biodiversity enhancement area and some additional landscaping between properties at this location and the solar development. If we look at properties in this location, some do have views towards the development. There is some landscaping provided. This is a street view image, obviously. But the properties also have significant areas to their south, and their main views, I would suggest, are to the south, private areas often to the south. So still a high degree of amenity for those properties. Solar development, again, is going to be something that's apparent in the landscape, certainly in the early stages. But from the properties themselves, the localised landform is such that there will be fairly restricted visibility of the solar panels. Indeed, the indication in this image is very little, if any, visibility. So impacts significant potentially on approaches to the properties, but less significant at the properties themselves, and certainly not impacts that would make it an undesirable place to live. If we move round to Suttyside Road, properties just on the outskirts of Forfar, again, as I've said, significant number of objections from residents in this area, and again, understandable, fairly significant change proposed in their immediate vicinity. Properties that sit close to the Carsview Road industrial estate, properties on the edge of the urban area where an element of change might be anticipated either through additional housing growth, through employment land growth. Areas around town can change through the period of time. At this location, we're looking at separation distances to the closest panels in excess of 200 metres and some localised screening provided by farm buildings and other buildings located just in the vicinity, just to the north of Suttyside Road. Properties themselves, range of properties, some with upper floor accommodation, some lower floor accommodation, but again, many with views looking towards the development itself. And we have existing images that show the nature of those views. So this is the western extent, and again, bottom images moving from west through to north. So we have the Cars Grey House, the Hatton of Cars Properties, located probably round about the middle ground. This is I think the roof of Forfar galvanisers that you can perhaps just make out at the western extent that you see in this area. Now, again, dotted lines identify areas where panels are unlikely to be visible by virtue of topography or localised landscape features such as the trees in this area, and the more solid line identifies areas where panels are likely to be visible. But again, through the passage of time and with the provision of mitigation, those impacts are likely to be substantially reduced. Again, in terms of the test that's applied, would this become an undesirable or unattractive place to live by virtue of the development? My suggestion to you is that it wouldn't, not least by virtue of the separation distances. Moving around to the southwest, this is a viewpoint just taken slightly to the north of Station Park, in proximity to properties at the Zoar. Again, I think a distance in the region of about 400 metres this time from the viewpoint to the closest solar panels. So just to give some context, we have the core path, North Main's core path running along this area, Forfar galvanisers, and then the core path continues down into the industrial estate at this point. So a view representative of typical views from the southwest. And you can see, without any mitigation, fairly substantial visibility, but at a reasonable distance, and again, through the passage of time, that impact mitigated through the provision of landscaping. Moving around, apologies for this, we're at the golf driving range. So from the Brechin Road, looking in an easterly direction, so we have the cafe, golf driving range, the proposed landscape belt that will be provided in this area, and additional landscape planting provided down this area. Again, we've had information from the applicant that suggests that issues in relation to glint and glare would not be significant for those using the golf driving range. Not unusual for golf courses to have water features. In Carnoustie, we have a golf course that's located next to the sea. And again, there can be reflection from those types of features, which are not dissimilar from any impact that could potentially be experienced if there is glint and glare arising from the solar panels. But the golf driving range, I understand, owned by one of the landowners proposing the solar development itself. We have an image from the elevated position on the public road. This is looking directly east towards the panels. You can see fairly extensive visibility in this area. You can see the core path that would provide the construction access. But as I've said, this is an access route that serves the surrounding agricultural fields, and it could be used by agricultural vehicles on a fairly intensive basis during harvest periods. But you can see extensive visibility, proposal to provide landscaping, tree planting at the end of the driving range, just in the middle ground that you can see in this image. And the image that you're looking at now superimposes the proposed landscaping and shows the extent of visibility significantly reduced. It suggests no visibility. I'm not going to suggest here that there would ever be no visibility from any of the areas round about. It will be something that people know is there. Whether you can see it or not, there will be acceptance or knowledge that it is there. And there are likely to be areas where you can see it. But I would suggest that the impacts here are localised and with the mitigation are unlikely to be significant through the passage of time. And again, just another image that shows the landscaping as it matures around the site. Moving around, we have an image from Balmashanner. So this time, round about 2.5 kilometres from the War Memorial on Balmashanner to the application site. And you get an impression of the visibility of the solar development just sitting in the area that we see here. So I would suggest in this type of view, very much seen as an extension of the urban area of the settlement, and no unacceptable impact on views from this elevated location, the sensitive elevated location that enjoys views over the town. We have a development which I would suggest is reasonably carefully sited. It's in an area where our guidance suggests there is potential to accommodate this type of development. We have a supportive policy framework. I've made reference to Berryhill. I need to remind members that Berryhill was taken, the decision on that application was taken before the publication of NPF 4. I would suggest NPF 4 provides a more favourable and a more positive environment for consideration of renewable energy proposals than it existed at that time. Policy allows for the development of prime land. There's conflicting information in relation to the status of this land. I would suggest that for planning purposes, you operate on the basis this is predominantly prime quality land. As matters stand, there's less than 1% of the prime quality land in Angus that's either consented or constructed as solar development. If the entire 55 hectares of this development is included within that, we're looking at about 1.1% of the prime land in Angus that would be occupied by solar development, and that's land that's mixed prime and non-prime. You will see from the NPF4 energy policy, there's recognition that significant landscape or visual impacts are likely to occur with development of this nature. But the policy indicates that where those impacts do occur, they are likely to be regarded as acceptable if they are localised or if they can be mitigated. And I would suggest to you that's the situation in this case. The development would meet the needs of nearly 8,000, the electricity needs of nearly 8,000 homes. That's significant. There's suggestion that we should look at mounting panels on roofs, domestic roofs, commercial roofs, and that's all very true. We need to do that, but I would suggest National Planning Framework is suggesting we need to be bold. There is a climate crisis, and there is a policy basis which says we need to give significant weight to that. We need to give significant weight to developments that are going to help address that. That's what we're faced with in this instance. There will be impacts. There is no question of that. In this case, there'll be impacts on core paths. There will be impacts on the amenity of people that live round about. I've shown you circumstances not dissimilar to that where a government reporter has accepted those impacts, recognising the benefits that are associated with the development. I think when you balance competing policy requirements, this proposal, in my view, complies with development plan policy subject to the conditions that are before you, and it's recommended for approval for the reason and subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Hunter. It's again a very thorough and worthy presentation of the time given the amount of interest this has generated. Take a breath for a second. Do elected members have questions for Mr Hunter? We'll start with you, Councillor Nicholl. Put your mic on.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Hunter, that was some presentation. The Scottish Government NPF4 policy states preference is given to renewable energy, even if it's on prime agricultural ground. The recent appeal for a similar site in Angus overturning the committee's decision not to pass it, and Angus Council officers in favour of this one, does that mean it will be passed regardless?
The decision today on whether the application is approved or refused is a matter for this committee and this committee alone. As officers, we seek to give you the best advice that we possibly can. We seek to identify the relevant policies, and we seek to provide you with advice on how we think those policies should be considered and the weight that should be given to different factors. In doing that, we have regard to appeal decisions, and you've had the benefit of the appeal decision at Berry Hill. I, as an officer, can't second guess what you will do as elected members. You're entitled to reach your own opinion, having regard to the report, having regard to what you hear today from the people that speak either in favour or in objection to the application. But you are required to make the decision giving primacy to the development plan. That's what the law says. You have to make the decision in accordance with the development plan unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. So that's the balancing act you have to make today. And I would suggest you have to make the decision that you think is the right decision, having regard to those matters and, in some respects, disregarding what might happen at any subsequent procedure. We can't second guess what would happen if the application was refused and if an appeal was submitted and if that appeal was to be determined by a Scottish Government reporter. I suggest you have to make the decision that you think is right, having regard to the development plan and relevant material planning considerations.
Thanks, Mr Hunter. Slightly unfair question, I think. Councillor Clark, what's up to you first?
Thank you, Convener. And Mr Hunter, yes, I would agree with Mr Nicholl there. Councillor Nicholl, that was some presentation, and thank you so much for it, because I did learn an awful lot. Just a couple of points, and by way of questions, really. In terms of this local area, especially at the Suttyside area, coming up from the town, I cycle that a lot, and I walk it. So I do know it relatively well, going all the way around to Lunan Head. You mentioned earlier in terms of, I'll call it domestic traffic, because when I say that, it's farmland traffic, like tractors and balers and all sorts of things, which mean that I really do need to get into the side quite often. There's a lot of water sits there quite a lot. So in terms of what will be monitored, because that's a 6 months construction site, I've been trying to carefully note all this down. What I'm asking really, is that going to be monitored carefully? So that's kind of number one really there. And the mitigation screening, which we know, I mean, I'm no gardener, but I know that, you know, you have to be very careful what you plant to make sure you get it growing fast enough. I've heard that hawthorn's quite good. I'll take that for granted, since I can't really say anything about that. But really, and I'll go in further later on, but I suppose really the mitigating circumstance of landscaping is always something, and bunds and things, there's always something I'm concerned about. And also from the point of view of, in terms of really monitoring how much traffic there might be, because the roads, this is just me asking at this stage, and I will be making my mind up today.
Thank you. So I'm going to have a slight nod towards my roads colleague just as I answer this. But my recollection is the indication is that we're looking at maybe 9 HGV vehicles in and 9 HGV vehicles out of the site during the construction phase. And that's purely along the North Mains to Suttyside core path. Now, from a planning perspective, we can't readily determine the extent of the construction period. The indication from the applicant is we're looking at 6 months. That can be affected by a variety of factors, whether it's the weather that we enjoy, or, you know, I guess economic circumstances and a variety of factors. But that's the applicant's estimate, and the indication is we're looking at around total vehicle movements of around 18 HGV movements a day. We have construction management plans, construction traffic management plan required by virtue of the proposed conditions, and we have, as I alluded to, the access management plan, which would look predominantly at access issues in relation to the core paths, impacts on those and mitigation for those, which might include localised rerouting whilst construction traffic is using that route. So there are ways of mitigating the impacts. There is no way of avoiding those impacts. I think what the applicant has sought to do is try and avoid using the likes of Suttyside Road as a construction access point. They're looking to use Brechin Road to minimise impacts on the people that round about. It minimises the number of residential properties that the route passes. But you know, you all make enough decisions on planning applications to know that impacts cannot be avoided. What we're looking to do are minimise those impacts and mitigate them. It's a major development. We would seek to monitor compliance with conditions in relation to a major development within the resource constraints that we have as a council. We will not have somebody there every week, every day, certainly not every hour of every day, monitoring that. But if it's approved, if it's constructed, and if there are complaints regarding that, we would certainly seek to act upon that. The landscaping, we have our own countryside officer. He's given some preliminary advice in relation to the nature of planting that could be appropriate. There are different areas within the site. There's the wetland area that runs along the northern boundary adjacent to the Lemno Burn, and there might be particular species that are appropriate in that location. There is some benefit in terms of planting more established trees. There is some benefit in planting younger whips. Ultimately, by the time you get to 5, maybe 10 years, there's probably not very much difference between growth rates between them. So I think if it was approved and if we were seeking to achieve that mitigation, it's achieving that appropriate mix of plant species, plant age, and appropriate management of it as well. You know, safeguarding the plants from the rabbits and deer that invariably enjoy eating things that are freshly planted. So, you know, there are mitigation measures that we can deploy. There are other sites where that has been less than successful and where the planting has published, and we're in dialogue with developers in relation to those to try and address that. But certainly the indication from the applicant and agent in this case is they are committed to trying to minimise the impacts. They've drawn back the development quite, I think, significantly from the early iterations that were out there. You can see they're reasonably well set back from the public roads. There are substantial areas of landscaping. There's an indication that certainly the planting, I think, to the north and the planting potentially to the west would be provided as advanced planting before any other development took place. So I think there is a prospective developer who is keen to see a development that works reasonably well, but you have the opportunity to speak to the agent and one of the landowners as we move through today's discussion.
That's Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Convener. One of your conditions, condition 3, 3C in fact, talks about the construction environmental management plan. It's on page 206. It says here that, let's have a look. Yeah, so it would include details for management of pollution, prevention, monitoring and such like. Will that pollution monitoring and prevention be retained after construction is finished? Will there be some kind of bond between? My concern is that the topography is that the north end, where the battery storage facility is very close to the Lemno Burn. And if there is a fire, even though there's a two-stage system where you've got dry powder to put the fire out and then water to reduce the heat, that water's got to go somewhere eventually. And I'm worried that it would go into the Lemno Burn. There's a lot of nasty toxins in lithium ion battery fires, and I'd be really concerned that that's going to end up, heading into the Lemno Burn all the way downstream through Milton and Finhaven, all the way to Brecon and all the way to the basin at Montrose. Is there some form of mitigation there to stop that from happening during operation of the site?
So the condition that you reference is purely about the construction. It's not an ongoing requirement. In terms of proximity, we're looking at a separation distance probably around 50 metres between the closest battery storage unit and the Lemon O'Byrne itself. So there's a fairly significant area for filtration. What I would say is that SEPA has been consulted on the application, and SEPA has not raised concern regarding potential adverse impact on the water environment. They've not said that they're concerned about that as a potential impact. Indeed, I think the construction environment management plan is not something they specifically asked for. It's something that we've attached as an additional safeguard to mitigate the construction impacts directly. In terms of the operational phase, again, we have the applicant's agent, and I would suggest that's maybe something you would want to direct to them.
Okay, Councillor Beattie, thanks for that. Any other questions, Mr. Hunter? Yeah, this is the only question, Mr. Hunter, at the moment. No more questions for the council officer. Switch myself off. Apologies. Under Standing Order 13 of Angus Council, applicants, supporters and objectors are given the opportunity to address any points which they wish the committee to take into account in coming to its decision. Speakers will be given 5 minutes only, and I'd remind speakers that members of this committee have already been provided with the opportunity to read all the submissions. There have been 220 pages to this report plus written objections, and we've looked at these, so we'll be familiar with many of the points raised, but regardless, you have 5 minutes each. We're going to we have two speakers initially, and if you come down to this microphone, please. I'll ask Mr. Prentice first. And Mr. Prentice, I see you've got 5 minutes. At 4 minutes, I'll give you 1 minute warning to wind up. And just if you switch on your mic, that's great.
Yes, good morning. Still just. My name is Neil Prentice, resident at Caretto Benzo, which is one of the houses which looks down onto the development. My wife and I have particular concerns about the whole development, obviously in terms of the impact it might have on our amenity, but our main objection and concern lies with, like many of the objectors, and I am speaking on behalf of some of them, lies in the loss of the prime agricultural land. The applicants themselves, in consultation material and in discussions with us, stated that they deliberately targeted poor quality land, but they have proved unprepared to admit that their investigation into the land quality was flawed. In paragraph 0.45 of Report 349, there is reference to published maps containing conflicting information, but the James Hutton Institute, who hold these maps, strongly recommend that the 1 to 50,000 map be used where they are available. And I've actually got a copy of the map, which is, I think, attached to my objection as well, but if anybody wanted to view it, they'd be welcome to do so. Pass that round. So the map does exist for the Suttyside area, and it clearly shows that the land is land capability for agriculture 3.1, which is prime. We find it extremely concerning that the views of the applicant that the site is non-prime are reflected in the report in paragraph 7.45. Scottish Government policy favours renewable energy over the protection of prime agricultural land, but that's forgetting one of the main reasons why planning legislation was introduced in the first place in 1947. Obviously, 1947 was during rationing and after the war. The policy needs to be questioned given current threats to food security. Since the LCA maps were produced some 40 years ago, much prime land has been lost to other land uses, and your consideration of the previous application gives you an example, very small scale, of the kind of land loss that's been occurring. Given its topography and its latitude, Scotland is not blessed with a good quantity of prime land in the first place. Agricultural production has been maintained through what are now regarded as non-sustainable farming methods, which are now being questioned. More sustainable farming and emphasis on biodiversity will reduce yields. World conflicts and international political game plays impact negatively on food production and distribution, particularly when you're totally dependent on imports. The impact of climate change on global food production will be negative. Recent events of drought and flooding affecting crop yields locally are surely a precursor of worse to come. Who can predict what the impacts will be during the 40-year lifespan of this application? And is a return to agriculture at the end really likely? Scotland can't feed its population as it is. We are going to need our most productive land every bit as much as we need power. And there are alternatives for how and where we produce power. The current financial problems facing agriculture are well documented, and it's no surprise that farmers are grasping diversification opportunities. Solar presents an opportunity for a guaranteed annual income per hectare above what could be achieved from growing food and without the hassle. Given Scottish Government policy
one more minute, okay.
Yeah, given Scottish Government policy overriding local considerations and creating planning precedent, who is going to limit the amount of prime land lost to renewables? SEPA holds its own website, says that protection for agricultural land lies with Scottish planning policy, i.e. yourselves and Scottish Government. The latter's pinned its flags to renewable, but are you going to pin your flags to food security or renewables? I would hope that you as a council are prepared to fight for food security and the steadily diminishing agricultural heritage of Angus by refusing this application and questioning this flawed policy, because if you don't, who with any influence will? Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. If you just remain there for a second, do members have any questions for Mr. Prentice on his statement? Okay, Mr. Smith, thanks very much indeed. Mr. Oliphant, I think, is the next speaker. Morning, Mr. Oliphant. That's the same again for yourself. Just 5 minutes. I'll give you a minute's warning. About 4 minutes, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Susan Oliphant and I live at the Benzel. I'm a member of Spare Suttyside, a group of around 30 people who came together to express their concerns regarding the proposed solar farm at Suttyside. Some of the group would have liked to be present today, either in person or online, but due to work commitments are unable to do so, and they asked me to say this on their behalf. My stance is that I oppose the application for Suttyside Farm, as I feel that position of what is, in essence, an industrial energy generation plant mere metres from the town boundary is in the wrong place, being so close to the town and residents. There is no benefit for forfeit if this application is approved. There's no job creation, no cheaper electricity, as some would believe, and any electricity generated will go to the UK national grid and be redistributed as where needed. It is also not guaranteed that the electricity generated at Suttyside will be requested by the national grid at all. There are many residents of Suttyside Road, North White Hills and the Benzel who are of the same opinion, and the fact that there are 110 objections to the proposal must surely add some credence. Of the 110 objections, 98 live in the Forfar and Angus area, 12 live further afield but have local connections here where they were brought up and have families still in the area. Of the 42 supporters, 18 live in the Forfar and Angus area, 12 in the Kelso area, and the rest further afield. Surely, local opinion has more credibility over the supporters who have little connection with the Forfar area. Indeed, one supporter remarked that as the solar farm was sited next to an industrial estate, then the location of the solar farm was not in a typically idyllic rural area. Obviously, that supporter is not familiar with the area. The area is well used by locals and is a popular walking area, all which adds to the well-being of the community. The residents of the area choose to live there, and many have lived there for decades, and feel strongly that the sanctity of their homes is being maligned by this planning application. There is also concern regarding many of the solar farm applications around Forfar and Angus and the cumulative effect of this. Is Angus Council and the Planning Committee strong enough to refuse any of these applications? Or is Angus going to move from a renowned high-quality food production area to a solar energy generation area? In 2019, a report was prepared for Angus Council by Urban Foresight and published in 2021. This was entitled Angus Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. Under the agricultural food, on page 39, are plans for innovation within the agricultural sector. In the same section entitled Good Food Nation, I quote, "Access to healthy, fresh food grown in a sustainable way can make a real and positive difference to people's health and well-being. Angus Council supports the Scottish Government's vision of becoming a good food nation, where people from every walk of life take pride and pleasure in, benefit from the food they produce, buy, cook, serve and eat each day." Has Angus Council abandoned this vision? If multiple solar farms are approved, where does that place the aspiration of a good food nation? Scotland already has installed, or in construction, awaiting construction, and in planning, 72 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity from wind farms alone. This does not include hydro, solar, or any other renewables.
One more minute, Ms. Sullivan. Okay, thank you.
This is 8 times what Ofgem predicts Scotland needs by 2042, and is 28 gigawatts less than the 100 gigawatts Ofgem predicts is the required energy requirement for all of UK energy. So why are we pushing for so much solar energy? I urge the Planning Committee to refuse permission for this solar farm, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Again, if you just remain there for a second. Again, any members have any questions for Ms. Oliphant? I see no hands. Okay, Ms. Oliphant, thank you very much indeed. Stand you're the landowner, I believe, that's right. Okay, again, similarly, 5 minutes, and I'll give you a minute warning if you'd like to kick off.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Lorna Dandy, and I am here to support this application. I represent the Robertson family, who own one of the 2 farms that form part of this application. I live at Hatton of Carse. My family moved to the area in 1943 when they took on the tenancy of Heatherstacks, a neighbouring farm. This continues to be farmed by us on a secure 1991 Act tenancy and is 257 hectares. In 1972, we purchased Suttyside Farm, 64 hectares, which had a sitting tenant. Last year, we bought out the sitting tenant when he retired, and we amalgamated Suttyside with our existing farming business based at Heatherstacks. The total area farmed is now 321 hectares, of which 64 hectares are held with vacant possession. For the previous 50 years, the farm was based around finishing cattle. However, as the risks increased, the profitability dropped, and the cattle business finally ended when Forfar Mart shut. We now grow feed wheat, malting barley, oats, and oilseed rape. We have a flock of breeding ewes producing Scotch lamb, and we are in our 2nd year of contract farming pigs in the cattle sheds, which we may look to invest and expand on further. We also sell free-range eggs at the road end from an honesty box under Dandy Eggs. Over the last few months, particularly in Angus, it has become clear that the damage being felt by extreme weather events is caused by our changing climate. Storm Babette has physically washed away our farm road, which is the core path that comes from North White Hills and runs through our farm. Climate change is the biggest challenge facing the world, and the thing that affects mostly is food production. So it's critical that we address climate change sooner rather than later. Another effect on food production are the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, which have caused global volatility, and so as a result basic costs for all businesses such as electricity, fuel and manufactured fertilisers have all risen at a much higher rate than general inflation because of their dependence on fossil fuels. The Farm Basic Payment Scheme is being phased out from 2025, and being realistic, we expect that direct government support from farming will be reduced further in the future. So small family farms will not survive unless they seek other sources of income to spread the risk in periods of uncertain subsidies and volatile commodities, including fuel. The Scottish Government has declared the twin crisis of climate and nature emergencies, with ambitious targets to become net zero by 2045. COP28 is just finishing, with another call to focus on climate change and the need for renewables. So our two main reasons for this solar project are, first of all, sustainability of the planet, with COP28 urging us to phase out or reduce our use of fossil fuels and limit temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees. And all businesses, including farming, are obliged to reduce their carbon emissions as we move forward towards Scotland's net zero targets. And secondly, sustainability of the farm business. We need to diversify to generate profit, to ensure the continuity of our business and to secure future investment in what is a very capital-intensive industry. However, in our situation, as we are 1991 Act tenants, we are not permitted to diversify into non-farming use on our rented land. So the only opportunity we have to diversify is on the 64 hectares of owned land at Suttyside. We don't have the funds or the expertise to take this development forward ourselves, so we've partnered up with a developer and have agreed to lease them 40 hectares of land for solar panel use and a battery storage scheme. This represents only 12% of the land farmed by our business. The land at Suttyside is of poorer quality than the other land that we farm and is not used for growing winter cereals, which generally produce higher yields than spring sown crops.
If you could just wind up now, please, Ms. Standy.
Okay, the rental income would be a game changer for our farming business. There may be an opportunity to be supplied with renewable energy, but the real benefit will become from our guaranteed income, which will mean we can reinvest in the business, expand the contract farming of pigs by investing in a purpose-built shed at Heatherstacks to double our capacity for fattening pigs. We'll get more dung from this, which means we'll need less manufactured fertiliser, so we will be reducing our carbon footprint. So we'll have increased food production from less land and reduced carbon footprint. It will secure the employment of 2 full-time members of staff, and because we always use local contractors and agricultural supply businesses, the income generated will be spent locally, and the local multiplier effect means money stays in the Forfar area supporting local businesses and jobs. So to summary, the income generated from 12% of our land will future-proof an established farm business for the next 40 years. It will allow us to produce more food using less land whilst reducing our carbon footprint. We have no other land available to us on which to diversify, and will kick-start the accelerated change to renewables in Angus and will contribute to Scotland's net zero. And I ask the committee to be bold in their decision. And the final point is the core path is being washed away. Yeah.
Before you go any longer on it, thank you very much, Ms. Dandy, for your statement. Again, for members, I'll take questions for the applicant here, or sorry, for the landowner. It's so Councillor Durno, first of all. If you'd like to just keep your microphone. Sorry, yeah, when you get response.
Okay, thanks, Convener. I'd just like to ask you that before I came to planning the last 24 hours, I've been reading reports in the New Scientist magazine and various other literature regarding sheep living in rows of solar panels. And the benefits for the sheep is the grazing, the food, and because of the wildlife havens, and we've discussed with Mr Hunter the biodiversity crisis. And I just wondered, you did mention pigs, I just wondered with the size of the scheme for the solar panels, do you have any plans to put some sheep on the land, and that would actually increase agriculture as well as energy. Thanks.
Yes, we have our flock of Scottish mules, and we do breed our own lambs. So yes, we will intend to graze in between the rows, and the biodiversity field as well. It will need grazed in the autumn to take once the flowers have seeded.
Any other questions from members? Landowner? Okay, Ms. Dandy, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And now we also have Richard Murray, I think, who is the agent for the applicant. Mr. Murray, are you want to make a statement, or are you willing just to answer questions?
I'll have a statement.
Okay.
But I'll try and keep it brief.
Yeah. As long as you keep it to 5 minutes, that's all that really matters. Okay, we'll let you go off, and I'll give you a minute's warning. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing me today. The proposed solar farm and battery storage development will make a significant positive contribution towards the urgent need to meet UK renewable energy targets. Policy guidance confirms that schemes should be supported where the technology can operate efficiently and environmental and cumulative impacts can be satisfactorily addressed. In this case, it is the professional opinion of your council officers and all statutory consultees that any associated environmental impacts of the proposed solar farm can be satisfactorily addressed. However, it is acknowledged that given the nature and scale, it is inevitable that large-scale solar farms will never be completely invisible within the landscape. In this context, national and local policy accepts a positive approach indicating that development will be approved where the harm could be outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. The 49.9 megawatt development would provide a source of renewable energy generation capable of meeting the electricity needs equivalent to around 8,000 homes. And this contribution towards reducing carbon emissions is afforded significant weight in the planning balance. The Council's guidance on solar farm development confirms that the site landscape type has a capacity to accommodate this type of scheme. Existing industrial units lie south of the site, and the development has been designed to ensure that the panels are being pulled away from existing residential properties to the southeast to minimise impact on visual amenity of the residents. The Council officers agree with the assessment of our landscape consultants that harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area would be localised. Any adverse effects will be progressively mitigated as the proposed landscaping scheme matures. After decommissioning, the scheme would leave an enhanced landscape consistent with the objectives of the development plan policy. In addition, the mitigation scheme provides a significant biodiversity improvements. The application area measures 55 hectares in size, but the panels and the equipment only take up a physical cover area of 14 hectares of this land, and the space in between and around the panels will be seeded wildflower and grassland mix. Large undeveloped areas in the southeastern corner of the site will accommodate a new biodiversity enhancement area. A biodiversity net gain calculation report accompanies the application and demonstrates that the scheme would create over 58% increase in habitat units and a hugely significant 15,000% increase in hedgerow units when compared to the baseline conditions. This level of biodiversity habitat creation and gain aligns with the guidance set out within Nature Scott's advice for solar installations, which was updated in 2022, and will provide a huge boost for wildlife in the area. Although it is understood some residents have objected to the scheme on the grounds that it would be built on agricultural land, the proposals will not be a threat to local or national food security. The development is uniquely made up of two small and less productive areas of land split between two local farmers. In regard to land classification, without specific lab testing, it is uncertain if the land grade is class 3.1 or 3.2. Notwithstanding this, development plan policy, as you've heard, including the newly published NPF4, is clear that the loss of prime agricultural land will be supported where the proposals constitute renewable energy development. The applicant has submitted a detailed noise and glint and glare assessment, which will conclude that the development would not cause any significant impacts. This has been verified by the Council's Environmental Health Officer, who has raised no objection. Both national and development plan policy recognises that large-scale solar farms may result in some landscape and visual impact harm. However, both adopt a positive approach, indicating that development can be approved where the harm is outweighed by the benefits. Through a combination of topography, existing screening and landscaping mitigation, the adverse effect of on the landscape character and visual impact will be limited and highly localised. The scheme will make a significant contribution to tackling climate change, will create long-lasting and comprehensive biodiversity benefits, and assist local farmers to diversify and stay profitable. It is also important to note that the applicant has a live and active agreed grid connection.
Just one more minute.
Connections are dealt with
One more minute, okay.
on a queue system, and the applicant is at the front of this queue, ensuring that the proposals can be built right away and make an immediate contribution to our our power network. On balance, it is considered the benefits of the scheme outweigh the short-term and localised impacts. We would therefore respectfully ask councillors to support your officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Okay, Ms Murray, apologies for interrupting you like that. Thanks for that. Are there any questions for the applicant's agent? Councillor Beattie.
Hi, thanks very much. You may have heard me ask Mr Hunter a question earlier about mitigating pollution getting to the Lemno Burn. How would you do that?
Is that, can I ask, is that mainly relating to the battery storage? Is that the bit you were talking? Okay, thank you. I mean, to start off with, the battery storage units are in their own separate compound, as you've probably seen on the plans. They're also contained within their own sealed containers. So the risk of any runoff from those types of batteries or any fault would first of all be contained within the battery. The batteries themselves have a number of different systems now that are employed within there, both for safety, ensuring that there's any detection of overheating is picked up straight away, any discharge from any of the batteries, which would only really occur if there was overheating. And that normally is triggered by effectively a gas that comes out of the battery before it even starts to smoke or catch fire. That's at the point after about 45 minutes to an hour when there's thermal runaway, which you may have heard of from batteries. So in effect, each of the batteries are also contained within effectively separate cooling bays where they're effectively slotted in. So effectively imagine that racking system, where before in the first types of batteries they're effectively just stacked on top of each other. Now they have almost individual racking systems, a bit like a large-scale hard drive system, as you might imagine from a mainframe type system. So there's separation between each of those, and they're all in individual cooling trays. So in terms of drip and pollution coming from that, I think it's highly unlikely that would take effect. Of course, they're also monitored on a regular basis, both by the internal electronic systems as well as staff that will visit regularly to keep an eye on the batteries. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Okay, partly. The bit that I'm looking at is on page 216, where it says a two-phase second line of defence is then employed, which uses a fire retardant power to remove oxygen from the system and a water spray system to flood the chamber to cool the batteries. My question is, where does that water go if that happens?
Yes. Okay, so that's first of all, what you're talking about there is obviously in the event of an emergency, which is incredibly rare and unlikely to happen. In terms of the batteries themselves, you may see them on the plans, they actually have a little tray that sits underneath them. So effectively there's a discharge tray that would stop anything if there was any leakage coming from those units. That would fall into the tray, and there would be a trough there effectively that would pick up that water. As mentioned before, though, they are sealed units, so therefore until such time as the fire brigade are there, and we would be on site as well, that's the time when obviously that would be opened up and there would be a system in place. You'll have to forgive me on the basis that I am a town planner. I'm not the developer or operator of one of these schemes, but as far as I'm aware, that's the case, and more than happy to provide further detail to you in a battery safety management plan, which could be supplied. They have to do that, by the way, just to give you some peace of mind. They have to do that in order to get insured for these types of projects. They're multi-million-pound projects, and therefore, in order to get insurance, they have to have a full safety management plan that is prepared in line with local fire brigades and get an entire plan put in place.
Okay, I think a battery safety I think a battery safety management plan distributed to all members would be really useful.
Of course. Yes.
Just before we go any further on this, I think I can bring in Mr. Hunter just to add to the discussion on this particular topic. Al?
Yeah, I don't think I've actually got very much to add beyond what Mr. Murray suggested and what you've picked up. Councillor Beattie, I think the potential to add to condition 3, I think it is, that lists the pre-commencement information that's required. We could add a requirement to a fire emergency plan, including details of drainage, could be included as a conditional requirement.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, is there any other questions for Mr. Murray? No, Mr. Murray, thanks very much for your time. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll just make it public. We've moved from speakers and we now go to questions, comments from elected members. And I'm going to start with Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you very much, Convener. I do have concerns about solar farms on prime agricultural land. But in these financial times, you can't blame farmers for going with these projects. You know, as the Scottish Government is withholding 60 million of the ring-fence grants to the farmers in Scotland, they have to look for alternative incomes. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nicholl. Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks, Convener. There is no doubt a huge amount of farmland in Angus that could potentially be used for solar farms, but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of potential sites are never going to be put to solar farms because there isn't grid connections, grid capacity. For a whole variety of reasons, we're never going to see the whole of Angus covered in solar farms. The permissions granted so far, as in the papers and pointed out by Mr. Hunter, a tiny fraction of Angus has solar farm permission at the moment, and that's never going to increase to more than a tiny fraction. It's also been pointed out, quite rightly, that this is a quasi-judicial committee and elected members who serve in it have a legal responsibility to make any decisions they do make in accordance with legislation, and the legislation is quite clear. Under NPF 4, that prime agricultural land is not to be used as a reason. Whether it's grade 3.1 or 3.2, it's not to be used as a reason for turning down applications for solar farms. And that's my comment. Thanks.
Yep, that's Councillor Bass. Councillor Durnell.
Solar panels and agriculture can work together. Grazing sheep is a great example of dual land use. It can provide food for the sheep and for us, and fuel from solar energy through clean energy will leave our land healthy for the future.
That's Councillor Durnell. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I won't repeat what other members have said, but I think climate change is a real factor. We've had Storm Babette in the recent weeks here, and we've seen the huge impacts that has made. Mr. Hunter has given us the figure for the amount of prime agricultural land that is either in solar development or has solar farms, and that is round about 1%. And that figure doesn't give me any concern. Now, if that figure rises, and I take Councillor Bray's point about grid connections, if it rises significantly, then I think we're going to be expecting some sort of clear guidance from Scottish Government what we should do, because there's clearly, as I think Mr. Prentice pointed out, the balance between food and fuel, essentially. So at the moment at 1%, and we've heard what NPF 4 is saying about supporting renewable development, that doesn't give me a concern. If that figure got much larger, then I think we'll be looking for appropriate advice from people above our pay grade, essentially. So I have no problems with this application. I think the mitigation measures look reasonable. Mr Hunter has given us the take from the Berry Hill decision and what the reporter said there, so I'm happy to support the application.
Okay, Councillor Bayes. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Convener. And as the remaining local member, this has been a very hard one for me. I am an environmentalist, but I also enjoy a rural life. I already mentioned that, and I walk these roads and lanes and paths. 98 local people against this. That's not showing that they're disinterested. That's showing the real concern and care for their environment. And it doesn't mean to say that they're not interested in the environment. They are. But they're also naturally interested in their surrounds. I deliberately asked our learned friend there, after his amazing contribution this morning, certain questions that needed to be answered. And I think they're quite domestic questions insofar as road traffic when you're constructing, because that's important as well. People have concerns about that. You know, yes, they're little roads in most cases, but they're still roads. People still have to make, you know, get out and in to work, etc. You can see just the amount of paperwork I've got sitting in front of me and the amount of reading that's gone into this, the investigation that's gone into it. Looking at the various policies and trying to do my very best. But I do have to come down on the decision that I'm today, not listen to anything else that might happen or does happen. And I can say I'm quite reluctant, but I will go with the decision that's been, well, at least the proposition of giving this the green light today. And I hope I've explained enough as to why I've come to that decision.
Okay, Councillor Clark, thank you very much. Is there anybody online? No. Okay, I'll just kind of sum up a little bit from my own perspective on this. I have very similar views to Councillor Clark, to be frank, on this matter. It's very difficult in some cases for councillors sometimes to consider the heart and consider the head in matters such as this. But we must acknowledge the number of representations on the application itself. There's no doubt the main things that have come through in all of this is the issue of prime agricultural land is one thing. There's no doubt that the proposal itself would give rise to impacts on the landscape and visual amenity. There are all impacts on the core path. These have all been brought into discussion. But there have been, I've seen images of the mitigation for a lot of these in here, and the adverse impacts that we've got here have to be balanced against the desirability of facilitating development such as this. It was very important, I think, to consider the comparison with Berry Hill Farm, which most of us were involved with on decision making there, and experience has shown us what the outcome of that can be. So I think overall the take cognizance of the objections here, but it was interesting to hear also from the landowner about the need to diversify to maintain sustainability for farming, and bearing in mind that of the overall amount of area considered, we're talking about 12% would be put forward to this solar development, the rest towards continuing agriculture and all this. So it's a difficult one, but purely for me as a convener on this one, I'm going to move approval of the application. And before I ask for any amendment, do I have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Duff, thank you very much. Is there anyone willing to provide an amendment to the application? Sorry, with the conditions, of course. I'm sorry. I will say that if there are conditions in the attached to it, of course, like they go and the additional one regarding to Councillor Beattie's proposal. So we've got seconded and Councillor Duff. Is there any amendment? No. In that case, the application 23/00417 I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Application 22/00870 is approved. And can I thank everyone for their time this morning? Thank you very much indeed. We're just going to get from Councillor McLaren. Can I suggest that we take a 5-minute comfort break, please, for everybody?
John, could you...
Right, thanks, members, just for that short break. Before we start, we have one more agenda item. Can I suggest to members that under Standing Order 21.8 that a move to suspend standing orders so that we can move through the 3-hour rule to conclude the meeting? Is that all agreed? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Right, agenda item 9 deals with planning application 23/00417 full by Santander for the installation of internal heating, cooling and ventilation equipment, installation of external ductwork and a timber fence surround, replacement of external glazing with metal louvres and removal of external air conditioning condenser unit. So again, Mr. Hunter, third one for you.
Thank you again, Convener, and I'll be quicker this time, I think. Different scale of application, but no less significant in terms of the interest of the people affected by it. Planning application within the High Street area of Arbroath. You read out very eloquently the description of development, but I need to be clear that the part that requires planning permission is the external ductwork and the associated external alterations. The installation of the internal heating and cooling system itself, purely internal works, do not require planning permission. So what we're focusing on today is the external ductwork, the screen associated with that, and some alterations to a window on the property. Very small scale map, but gives an adequate representation of the location of the application site. We have the High Street area of Arbroath, and we have Kirk Square, which will be well known to all members. We have the property itself, the bank premises at ground floor of the property. It's within the conservation area, it's within the defined town centre. But the front elevation that we're looking at here, unaltered by the proposal before you. As we move round to the rear of the property, the area that we're looking at is reasonably well screened from public views. So it's behind the wall, the outbuildings, the foliage that we see here, sitting at the foot of the flatted property that we see in this area. Looking at the proposal itself, the bottom image shows the existing situation. It shows a water tank located on top of a flat roof at the rear of the premises, and it shows an existing air conditioning unit which would be removed as part of the proposal. It also shows a window, existing glazed window with metal shutters where the glazing would be removed, and a metal louver would be inserted in that area to assist with air movement associated with the internal heating and ventilation system. Now, the top image here shows that the proposal would involve the siting of an extractor duct on top of the flat roof, and that would be enclosed by a timber box, effectively, which would look like, or very similar to, an existing timber structure on the roof, which encloses a water tank. And you can see below that as well the alterations to the window, which would involve the installation of the metal louvre. So, air conditioning unit removed, and a further timber type structure located within the roof area that we see here. We have a stairwell window, so roughly maybe half a metre or so separation between the stairwell window and the box itself, and you can see windows sitting behind that, habitable room windows in residential properties. Those are around about 4.5 metres from the timber box that you see here. We have a noise impact assessment in association with the proposal, And our environmental health colleagues have confirmed that noise emissions from the duct should be capable of complying with recognised noise limits that apply to all infrastructure of this nature that's located within town centre areas. And as members will be aware, this type of infrastructure, not unusual, not uncommon, associated with commercial premises within town centre areas. If we look at the rear of the building itself, you can see the existing water tank box and something similar, around about 1.5 metres square, about 1 metre in height, located just round about the point that we see in this area. So this is the stairwell window, and these are the windows in the neighbouring residential property. So certainly the structure would be visible from those properties, from views from those windows, but very akin to the water tank that's there at the present time, and the existing air conditioning plant that you see there removed as part of the proposal and required by conditions. Concerns in the representations regarding ownership of the roof, and some concern that residents use it for outdoor recreational purposes at the moment. And you'll see from the papers that the bank has suggested they have title of the roof, and that other parties don't have right to access the roof for leisure purposes. There's no planning permission that allows for the roof to be used for that purpose, and similarly no building warrant approval that allows for the roof to be used for that type of purpose. The noise limits proposed by Environmental Health would safeguard anybody using outdoor areas associated with the property. So you can see a courtyard area just located adjacent to the flat roof. But the noise limits should ensure the amenity of people that live round about, and are typical of the noise limits that apply to other properties or other similar development within town centre areas. Issues regarding ownership of the roof are essentially a civil matter. Civil matters are not matters that the planning authority should become embroiled in. It's not the role of the planning committee to determine issues in relation to land ownership, but the applicant has indicated it's in their control and ownership, and other parties do not have lawful right to use it, but that is a civil matter. Moving around, this is a view from West Abbey Street. As I've indicated, the property is within a conservation area, but as you can see from the public realm, from public areas around West Abbey Street, the building itself largely invisible from the wider public area, so no significant issues in terms of impact on the character or appearance of the conservation area, and the amenity issues that are raised and concerns are addressed by the noise impact assessment that has been submitted and by the noise condition as recommended by our environmental health colleagues. But this is a town centre use, it's a town centre location. Policies are generally supportive of development that would help retain town centre uses in town centre locations, and the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions before you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Do members have any questions for Mr Hunter? Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just really for clarification, so this planning application isn't about the principle of installing air conditioning. It's about the ductwork, etc.
The application relates to the physical works that require planning permission, and that is the ductwork and the screen on the exterior of the building. Yes.
Any other questions? Sales officer? Nope. Okay. In that case, again, we have one speaker and also the applicant, or the agent of the applicant. I think it's right. Mr Smart. Smart, again, if you'd like to take your seat here. And again, we'll give you 5 minutes, and I'll give you a minute warning just to make your statement. And at the end of it, if you remain, in case there's any questions from council members, off you go. The red button here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this application, the problems really started in about 2019 when the branch was renovated quite considerably. The old unit was taken away, which was quite a small unit with one kind of propeller unit, and it was situated outside on a metal stand. And then when the new unit was brought in, when, like I say, the internals of the bank were completely renovated, this was a huge unit. I mean, it's like almost as tall as me, like probably like 5 feet in height, you know, probably like this kind of width and this kind of depth with 2 propellers this time. And it was obviously a lot more electronically controlled than the original old unit, which was probably put in the 90s or something like that. And they just had no control over this thing at all. I mean, the noise levels were horrendous. Police had to be called, you know, at least once, but of course it's a civil matter, like you say, so they can't really do anything. But if you were to have a car on the other side of the building revving its engine at 3 o'clock in the morning, then it would be a police matter. So, yeah, it's just the way it is, I'm afraid. So, after multiple complaints about it, it was finally shut down by the council because it didn't have any planning permission. So this is all now dragged on for 4 years because there's also been, as you stated, ownership of that land issues. I don't want to go into that too much, but they still seem to have failed to prove beyond all reasonable doubt to show a land ownership certificate. Now, I've spoken to my solicitor about it, and I actually ordered deeds from the land registry and had a look at them, and they're the old fuse, you know, because the building was built in 1892.
Mark, just interrupt you a second. I would suggest you don't go down the route, something that we can't judge on. Yeah. So on land ownership, we're not going to even consider that today. Yeah. So I wouldn't. Okay. Okay. Well, like I said, there's the land ownership thing that still is a bit of a grey area. Also, the planning itself, which the applicant has put up on the case, it doesn't actually state that extension at the back ever did have planning permission. It just states that it probably would have included what they've put up as planning permission, but they also basically expanded into a retail shop on the Kirk Square area. So that could be what that's talking about. So again, there's some big black holes in their case about the ownership and the building warrant on that building. But anyway, it's basically now been shut down for about 4 years, and so they've now decided to get it inside the building. But my and the other neighbours' main concerns are, and as you can see by the scale of this kind of beehive thing they're going to put on the top there, it's still a significant industrial unit. It's something like you would see in the back of a big factory somewhere, you know. I mean, the nearest bedroom windows are only 4 or 5 metres away from this thing, you know. So we've all got some major concerns about the actual noise impact. And going by their history of controlling it, you know, it seems like they just don't know how to kind of manage it properly. And it's, you know, before it was taken down, it was running through the night, you know, almost all the time. And if it does get passed, you know, they're going to be using it, wanting it to start at like 8 a.m. in the morning, where they don't even get there until 9:30. So again, they've got it running for like an hour and a half before anybody even gets there and stuff, you know. So yeah, noise, if it gets passed, noise is the major concern here, you know, because it's a huge unit. And even so it's enclosed, the bulk of the noise comes from the airflow, because you've got 2 massive propellers in this thing, you know. There was also a lot of vibration from it when it was outside, enough that the neighbour told me actually rattle something on his wall inside his kitchen, you know. So we're never going to know until it's actually, if it gets passed and it gets built and it's operational, we're never going to know just exactly how much of an impact it's going to make. And as for it being a high street environment, and yes, there is sort of noise here and there, to be honest with you, it's actually very, very quiet at nights in the high street these days, because most of the pubs are shut now.
you know, and honestly, most of the time you can hear a pin drop in that area, and that's no exaggeration. It's very quiet, because unlike the schemes, you don't have kids running about, you know, in the evenings and stuff like that. So yeah, but like I say, if it gets past, noise is the main concern for the residents.
I'll just call you off there now, Mr. Smart. I think
That's
you've gone
okay.
past your time, okay, but
Yeah,
that's fine.
okay.
Thanks. Just hang about for a second, just in case there are any questions from you
Okay.
from members. On that one, are there any questions from, okay, Councillor Duff?
Well, I guess it's sort of a question. I mean, one of the condition one is on noise. So, I mean, if it is passed and installed and the noise is, in your view, unacceptable, you have recourse to report it to the council. Environmental Health will come and measure it, and if it exceeds the limit here, then they will shut it down. So, you know, they're saying in their opinion that the noise levels are acceptable, but if they did I say all of that with right?
But like I say, the main issue, I mean, obviously it's not that much of an issue during business hours ultimately, although, you know, going by past experience, it's still very un-environmentally friendly and very antisocial to be right next door to this thing, you know. I mean, as somebody who lives in the centre of the town, I mean, we are quite tolerant to noise, obviously, but you know, the hum of traffic or the hum of people speaking and stuff and passing in the high street is very different to a continual kind of high, reasonably high pitch whine of airflow, you know, like that type of industrial noise. So, like I say, the main concern is are they going to be controlling it? How are they going to control it so it's not coming on at nights, you know, not coming on when they're not there? That's the main concerns.
Sorry, thank you. Is there any other questions for Mr. Smart? No. Okay, thanks, Mr. Smart. That's for you. Thank you very much. Can I invite comments from members in that case?
Convener, could I have a point of clarification with officers?
Of course.
Could you clarify? We've heard the objector there, and thank you for your presentation. Talking about what was there before and the noise that it made and the disturbance it caused, but am I right in thinking that this is to be a new unit? It's going to be different, at least in some way, than what went before?
That's a bonus because I probably can't, but I think the applicant's agent is here. What I would say is that the previous unit was mounted externally. The current proposal involves mounting a unit inside the building, and actually doing that work inside the building does not require planning permission. What we are looking at is the acceptability of the duct on the exterior of the building and the acceptability of the screen work associated with that. So in essence, what was there previously is not directly relevant, and what goes inside the building is not directly relevant. If I could, you know, an analogy might be you may require planning permission for a TV aerial or a satellite dish. That might give rise to noise if you watch your telly really loudly, but I can't control that. The planning system cannot control what happens within the building. It can deal with the physical development that's necessitated or that's associated with that. In this case, it's the duct. To give the neighbours some comfort, the applicant has engaged a noise consultant. The noise consultant has looked at the noise environment in the area. They've looked at the noise emissions from the plant and equipment that's going to be installed, and they've looked at the nature of the duct. And they have suggested the mitigation that's incorporated within this proposal. That's been reviewed by our environmental health officers, who Councillor Duff correctly says, if there are complaints about its operation, would be responsible for investigation of that. The noise condition doesn't prevent the duct giving off noise, or doesn't control the hours of operation of the plant, but it does provide differential noise limits depending upon the time of day that the plant is being used. So during nighttime hours, 11 o'clock through until 7 o'clock in the morning, the noise rating curve is a lower noise rating curve, so it requires lower noise emissions than would be the case during the day, where background noise levels are naturally that little bit higher. So the condition is framed in such a way as to provide the safeguard that residents are looking for. Environmental health cannot give a guarantee regarding that, and similarly, I can't give a guarantee regarding that. It is a condition. Conditions are monitored. If there are complaints submitted, our environmental health guys would be in a position to do that monitoring, and a combination of us would be in a position to take action, as has occurred in relation to the plant and equipment that has been there previously, creating the issue.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And I do note that we have taken action on these premises before because of noise complaints. Thanks.
Just before, I think we'll actually call the applicant, or the agent of the applicant, Holly Gillingham. Again, do you wish to make a statement, or are you just willing to answer questions? Okay, again, 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got a minute left. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. Good afternoon all. By way of introduction, I'm the planning consultant acting on behalf of the applicant, Santander. As you may be aware, Santander have operated the branch since the 1980s, offering convenient banking services, including access to cash, to the local and wider Angus community. The proposal before you today is for internal heating, cooling, ventilation equipment to enable the continued operation of Santander's branch in Arbroath. The building currently has no heating, ventilation or air conditioning, making the branch extremely uncomfortable for employees and customers, with heavy reliance currently on portable electric heaters during these cold winter months. As the equipment proposed is internal, as has been discussed, the only part of the proposal requiring the planning permission is the external ducts and pipework and the housing associated with this, which is minimal. As you may be aware, a few planning applications for external heating and cooling equipment have been submitted since 2018 and have since been withdrawn. None of these applications reached determination stage. This included an application in 2018 for retrospective permission for existing equipment, which has since been removed or isolated. A condition is proposed as part of this application to ensure the remaining equipment is removed from the site. This revised application responds to previous concerns raised by residents and additional comments obtained from residents at the pre-application stage, where a letter was delivered to nearby residents, making them aware of the planning application and requesting early comments. The application therefore proposes all equipment to be positioned internally, with no units situated on the outside of the branch. This addresses the concerns raised regarding potential noise and visual impacts. The only elements of the proposal will be the housing for the duct pipes externally. The planning application is supported by a noise impact assessment, which has assessed the noise impact from the proposed development on neighbouring residential properties. The noise assessment methodology was agreed with Angus Council prior to the noise assessment being undertaken. The assessment concludes that the proposed equipment will operate at a low noise level internally, with noise levels experienced by residents as a result of the proposed equipment sitting below the prevailing background noise levels during the hours of operation. Additionally, Santander are investing in costly noise barriers to the vents to further suppress noise. Furthermore, residents should be unaware of when the equipment is operating. Environmental Health have reviewed the proposal and the submitted noise impact assessment and have raised no objection to the proposal, clarifying the proposal will not give rise to any noise concerns. They will control this via the proposed condition, which will monitor noise levels once the equipment is operational, which the applicant is willing to accept. In terms of the ownership queries raised, Santander provided legal evidence to the Council to demonstrate that the development proposed sits within Santander's sole demise. The proposal represents a significant investment in the town centre of Arbroath, and to mitigate the concerns raised, Santander have identified this as a solution regardless of the cost to them. The bank branch provides a convenient community service which contributes to the local economic growth of Arbroath, with the proposal ensuring the continued operation from this location. The branch currently employs 10 people and supports the town centre of Arbroath. Given the current economic climate, high streets across Scotland have been in decline, with a number of vacant buildings rising. In order to ensure the building, located within a prominent location on the high street, remains in use, it is essential that Santander can incorporate efficient cooling and heating equipment to meet Santander's goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. In addition, the occupancy of the building will assist in maintaining an active frontage while contributing to the viability and the vitality of the town centre through acting as an incentive for attracting more footfall in the area.
You can wind up now, please.
Yeah. Overall, as the officer's report concludes, the proposed development is common in town centre locations, and the nature of the development proposed is in accordance with relevant development plan policies and national planning policy, as it does not give rise to unacceptable impacts on amenity, natural or built cultural environment, or an infrastructure. As such, we respectfully ask members to approve the application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Gilmore. Just hang about there again. Is there any questions for the applicant's agent? No? Okay, thanks very much indeed. So I don't think this is a big issue, bearing in mind coming in from a company that deals in refrigeration and it's of a similar nature. But the noise rating is shown at 35 between 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock and 20 between 11 o'clock and 7 o'clock. And bearing in mind it's a bank, I'm wondering why it's 7 and 11 when would it not be simpler to make it 7 and to 6 p.m, for example, when the bank closes down and you bring the noise level down rather than waiting till 11 o'clock at night? I can't see the reason why in the condition. Now, that could be on for you, Alan, perhaps, but it just seems common sense to me, I thought.
Happy to pick that up, convener. The condition is about safeguarding residential amenity rather than the identity or operator of the premises. So the condition is reflecting what's differentiated by our environmental health colleagues between daytime hours and nighttime hours, and that's regardless of the identity of the operator or the hours that operator might actually seek to operate. So it's a broader thing than purely thinking this is a bank. It's saying these are the limits that are acceptable within normal daytime hours, and these are the limits that are acceptable at nighttime hours.
Okay, accept that. That's fine. Okay. There are comments in that case. I think if people look at the conditions in here, it is very specific about noise levels and what the impact would be if these are exceeded, and the fact that if they are exceeded, there is an opportunity for the planning authority to get involved in this through environmental health, etc. So quite simply, I'm going to move that this planning application is approved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Beattie, thank you very much. And any amendment to that? No? Okay, thank you. Planning application 23/00417 full is hereby approved. Thank you. Thanks for your time. And thank you. Have a good day, the rest of you. Thank you.
John, could we stop the live?